I write about hope at the edge of the climate crisis. I spent the last 5 years interviewing innovators and activists who are building the foundation for a sustainable society. And the culmination of that work is a book I wrote known as Bright Green Future. And it really goes into how we can begin to envision a sustainable society in the places that we live and the places that we love. But I must confess, sometimes being in the environmental movement, I feel a little like a hopeless romantic. The seas are rising, the land is drying out. We've got a firestorm in one season and then a polar vortex in the next. And that's not even talking about all the political, economic, and cultural challenges to even doing anything about it. But instead of tuning that all out, instead of watching Netflix on the couch at the end of our busy days, we're all here in meetings like this, staring straight into the heart of this seemingly hopeless situation. It's because we're determined to fix this mess. We believe that not only can we stop the destruction of our planet, but at the same time, build a better world than the one we live in now. To people outside the environmental movement or in sustainability, this might seem a little idealistic, but I believe that we have a secret that makes our dreams much more realistic than they may appear. Our secret is that we think differently. We know that we can't solve the climate crisis and our environmental challenges with the same thinking that caused them. So we view the future through a different lens. Often the way we conceptualize a crisis defines how we respond to it. And so I would like to ask you all here a question. To learn from your experience, wisdom, and visions for the future, in order to really think about what will form the foundation for a sustainable future in society. And so my question to you all is, what types of thinking do you feel we need in order to break free from our fossil fueled economy and envision a truly sustainable society? And so feel free to put in your thoughts in the chat as you mill about on this big question. Oftentimes the way when we seek to enact large change that requires a vast change in society, it often starts with the thinking of the way we conceptualize things before we can start to make some of the larger material changes. So think about this and put your responses into the chat and I'll read them off. If you want to raise your hand and speak directly, I can also, I will try to call on you there. Great. We have Frederick Gonzalez says systematically. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That is really important to think about the larger, broader systems of things, and not just like looking at one thing, but how things interact with each other and intersect. Roberta Boone says 7-generation thinking. That's also really great. I'm glad you brought that up. This is really rooted in indigenous traditions of thinking about how any decision we make now affects 7 generations in the future. So that would be our great grandmother's, our great grandchild's great grandchild, 7 generations. So what are the things we doing today affecting that? Ursula King says systems thinking. There's a whole body of literature and methodology. Great to see systems thinking really part of this, part of the milieu and part of how many of you are thinking about things. Ida says, yes, it could take a shift. Yeah, a shift in many different things and across how we think of things, conceptualize things, and then how that translates into action. Daniel says Duranko says slow thinking. Yeah, I like that. Slowing down, appreciating the things that happen at a slower pace around us, and taking joy in not immediate satisfaction, but delayed gratification, and the maybe sometimes simpler things around us that give us greater satisfaction. Lily says, we as a people are more adaptable than the economists make it seem. I really like that. We as humans, our adaptability, I would say, is one of our superpowers as humans, in being able to adapt to different changes in the climate, adapt to changes in our lives around us, even in the economy itself, and to different places that we've been throughout the world. Yeah, great to bring that perspective in. Erica says, my background is a clinical psychologist. I think we must first break through the denial. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up too. Focus in thinking about the fact that we are either ignoring, straight up denying, or just preferring not to think about the challenges that we face. And there's been a lot of great work by psychologists around how we get through that denial, how we break through that, and how we adapt, and how we address like an incredibly psychologically complex challenge that is both delayed in its effect on the planet, and not as immediate in terms of our inherent response to it, as well as requires fundamentally shifting in really the basis of our economy around carbon. So really, that's a really important thing to think. Robert Rich says, eating a more plant-based diet to reduce negative effects of producing meat. Recently learned a good new recipe for seitan. First attempt was miserable. Great, practice makes perfect. Yeah, feel free to share that later on in the chat. And yes, a plant-based diet is also a really good tool in reducing our effect on the planet. I mean, numbers vary from anywhere to a third to 2/3 of the planet is used by raising livestock or the feed for livestock. And so definitely that has an outside, in terms of our daily life, has an outsized impact on the planet. Majid says, collaborative thinking between many industries and techs. Yeah, I love that. We really do need so many different types of skills and different types of expertise and knowledge and parts of our economy, society, culture to come together in this process. And it reminds me of a book I read a few years back called The Infinite Resource, around ideas, creativity, collaboration being like this resource that never runs out, and something that like is a huge tool in solving our environmental challenges. Elizabeth Surface says, true cost. Yeah, so much of what we see in our stores is not the true cost on the planet, as well as people and communities, is not represented in the price we see. Molly says, change the way we think about and value animal life, shifting to plant-based. Yeah, I love that deeper thinking around multi-species thinking, not solely as solely anthropocentric, but looking beyond that, and the well-being of multiple different species, as well as the ecosystems on a systemic level of what that looks like when all these species interact. Jeffrey Berry says, depolarizing our cultural divides, learning to see all of us as part of the game, essential pieces of the process towards a more sustainable future. I know this can be hard, but we must. Yeah, I love that. It is really I do think it is really a shame how polarized uh, environment environmentalism as well as concern for climate change has become. I mean, it really affects all of us. Climate change doesn't care who we vote for. It doesn't care our political ideology. It will affect all of us. And it is encouraging in some ways to see that they're up over 75%, or three three out of every four people do care about climate change and think it is an issue we need to address. Um, I do I do wish that the political polarization that gets in the way of actually doing something about that, of the fact that the majority of people want to do something about that. So any ways we can de-escalate some of the messaging around it, or try to bring together folks from multiple sides to do something about this, is really inspiring. Ida says it's Ita. Thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate that correction. Just going to read a couple more before I jump into the presentation. Molly says pausing/stopping automatic purchasing from Amazon/online versus local. Yeah, that's also really important about thinking about how is our economic activity connected to the world? Is it just through one single corporation where the benefit is going mostly towards people interacting on that platform, versus how is our economic activity benefiting the people around us and supporting the community around us? And how is it, helping to nurture a vibrant local economy? So thank you for sharing that, Molly. And I'm just going to read this last one from Cheryl. We need to think about the way our choices impact the environment, the air, the water, soil, etc. Yeah, I mean, there's many different ways in which our choices, through our extremely segmented economy and globalized economy, affect places thousands upon thousands of miles away from us, just through simple choices. So I think that having that awareness is a really good step for understanding what the impact is and how systems might be able to change in order to create healthier impacts from our choices. So thank you, Cheryl. Apologies, and thank you for the 36 other people who wrote in. I unfortunately won't get a chance to get to all of those. So thank you so much for all of your really thoughtful contributions. There's clearly a lot of folks here who are thinking really deeply about sustainability, and that's really amazing to see. And a lot of the things you brought up are things that came up in my conversations that I had with different sustainability change makers. Great. And before I jump into the presentation, and before I dive in, really a crucial part of envisioning a sustainable society, especially in the United States, is acknowledging the wisdom of indigenous peoples that has been either systematically dismissed, devalued, and appropriated by colonialism. For millennia, landscapes on this continent have been shaped by human activity, but in many ways, this alteration was done to provide abundant resources for thousands of years, with attention to the health of ecologies. As we draw inspiration from the past, our challenge is to adapt these ways of thinking to the realities of our modern world. It's also important to acknowledge how our current economy has affected the lives of Black folks, people of color, and white folks who live near polluting facilities, power plants, and mines. We hope to bring to the fore some of their wisdom and visions for a sustainable society through some of the examples in this presentation. And really, over the last 5 years, I interviewed over 200 different change makers who are working to create a more sustainable future for both people and planet. And so really thinking about how, not just how do we shift, but how does our shift impact our communities and empower our communities. And in these different conversations, a few commonalities came up in the way that they approached their work. And so I wanted to share with you all here today a few of the insights from these conversations I had in order to add to your repertoire of sustainable design thinking. So these commonalities that came up are really these three different transformative ways of thinking. The first is systems thinking, which many of you mentioned already today, which is really about at the analysis level, when we approach sustainable design, it's about finding the deeper patterns that are hiding in plain sight. It's about looking beyond the surface level of what we see at first glance to see how things are interconnected and how one impact has an impact on many different parts of a system. And so that's really at the level of analysis of how we first start to look at the problem. The second is community thinking, which is all about embracing local people as beneficiaries of change. We obviously have to make a lot of changes in order to move to a sustainable society. And we have an opportunity in doing that to think of how those changes benefit people across many different unique communities, as well as bring to the fore the wisdom that exists in all of our different communities from our unique experiences. It's really the focus area of sustainable thinking being on the benefit to the community. And then thirdly, we have regeneration thinking, which is all about creating, in the way I'm defining it here, creating systems and communities that grow stronger and healthier over time. And so rather than degrade with every passing year or season, become more robust and resilient to challenges that might come up, or better able to benefit from different opportunities that present themselves. And so I'm going to dive into a little more on each one of these types of thinking, as well as specific examples of how different change makers have applied them throughout their work. Excuse me. So systems thinking is essentially all about looking at things as rather than disconnected as interconnected, and how do multiple areas affect each other as not solely existing kind of in a vacuum on their own. It's about seeing things not as linear as going from point A to point B, but seeing how point B influences point A in the next cycle, and then the next cycle. It's about seeing things as emerging all at once, rather than solely existing in silos. And importantly, it's about seeing the whole rather than solely the parts within it. And so I'm going to share an example of the difference between a traditional, more reductionist type of thinking and a systems thinking approach. And I like to call this story, which I think really illustrates the difference between these two, the parable of the techie and the farmer. And it has to do with a conversation I had when I was living in San Francisco a few years ago, a conversation I had with a serial entrepreneur, somebody who is clearly very brilliant, had founded multiple different companies. And at any given time, he said he has 5 different companies in the works. So it was really hard to pin down what he was focused on, but clearly very brilliant, had really thought deeply about a lot of things. And at some point in our conversation, we started talking about sustainability and sustainable agriculture. And one point that he made was he essentially said that regenerative agriculture, or trying to focus on building soil through the way we plant things and the way we grow our food, is completely pointless. He said, if we really wanted to sequester carbon in the ground, then wouldn't we just put a giant direct air capture system on that ground? We could sequester way more carbon per acre if we had a giant direct air capture system on that land, as opposed to a regenerative organic farm. And from a traditional thinking approach, a reductionist approach, he may have been right. You can sequester probably more carbon through directly capturing it in this giant carbon capture machine compared to a regenerative organic farm. But from a holistic and systems thinking approach, this ends up looking a little silly, because you start to see that the only benefit of a direct air capture system is capturing carbon. Whereas a regenerative organic farm might capture carbon, maybe less than a direct air capture system, but might capture carbon in the soil. It might provide the benefits of storing water better during times of drought. It might hold water, even more water, during times of flooding to act as almost like flood control and water management. And then also grows tons of healthy food, while also, in some cases with smaller farms, providing a place for people to connect with the food system that sustains us, and learn new skills and develop that connection with nature, which is so important for envisioning and being part of building a sustainable society. And so we start to see that if we only focus on optimizing one metric in a reductionist way, we miss all of the holistic benefits that come from looking at that larger system and what it can do when it's working at an approach from a more holistic level. So if we take a step back and start to look at the pattern of our cities and farms, we see that they often resemble a monoculture, following in this more reductionist line of thinking. It's all really about optimizing different metrics. In our cities, we focus on building a neighborhood that is focused on optimizing housing, another neighborhood that's focused on optimizing commerce through big strip malls and commercial centers and other places, and then all makers and creation of things in a completely separate area. On our farms, we see the same thing, where we optimize the production of cultivation of soy in one area, wheat in another, corn in another, and then animals and livestock in another area. And while this system is very good at optimizing these few metrics, it ends up sacrificing all of these other benefits that come from looking at the whole. In our cities, when we solely focus on separating all of these different uses, we miss the benefits that come from a vibrant neighborhood where all these different uses are around, where we live, where we play, where we work, are all mixed together. And we see a similar issue on our farms, where we sacrifice the health of the soil and all of the different things and benefits that come from rotating different crops and integrating nutrient systems through animals and in their interaction with plants in many different ways in a systemic process of cycling nutrients. And so I'm going to share an example of what it looks like in one community to take both the pattern of the city and the pattern of the farm and apply a more systemic lens to it. So this is an example of a town in Arizona, known as Gilbert, Arizona. And essentially, as the town was expanding rapidly and really buying up all the farmland, developers were buying up all the farmland in Gilbert. One of the family farms that was consulted and reached out to by developers to essentially just turn their farmland into a residential subdivision, they really advocated for doing something different. They wanted to preserve the sense of community that had existed in small towns, that their parents and grandparents had remembered. And so rather than just building a just kind of an ordinary residential subdivision, they decided to combine a mixed-use community with housing, with shops, with restaurants, and build it around a regenerative organic farm. And in doing so, people in the community get to access healthy food through the farm, get to also have a share of planting, and while that farm also provides a benefit to the soil, they get to, and then within the design of the residential community, they've mixed all of these different uses. Within housing, they've combined many different types of living for many different age ranges and parts of life. So rather than solely single family homes, they combined some single family homes with multifamily apartments, as well as a senior living facility and a school, to not just look at a neighborhood as like, this neighborhood is only for recent college grads, or this neighborhood is only for young families, but really to mix all of these different phases of life and kind of the richness that comes from interacting with people who have wisdom from these different parts of their lives together. In the old farmhouse, they built a restaurant, and where people in the community can walk to. In what used to be the tractor shed, they built a maker space, as well as many different storefronts from makers, where there's a brewery in there. There's several different woodworkers and craft makers who make different products that they sell there, as well as a co-working space. And in doing so, kind of creating this like small little ecosystem of new ventures for people, either in the community to support, as well as the opportunity to potentially be involved in that and start something there, kind of moving the work that they do in there. They also started a coffee shop, and in doing that, they started to see all of these other different benefits. They really created a destination in the area, in a place where it is mostly designed around car dependent development. And they created a destination where people come to visit on the weekends, to visit the craft makers, to go to the restaurant, to visit the farm. They also created a kind of event space on the farm where people can host events, or people even get married there. And so by really thinking about like, what does it look like when we mix all of these things together, they ended up creating something that was far more powerful than they could have done if they were just focused on like, how do we get the most residents for the least money for the whatever price point and model, economic financial model we have for it, but really created something at a whole that was better than that. And so secondly, we have community thinking. And really, as we shift the benefits of change, as we work on this transformational aspect of creating a sustainable society, it's so important to really step back and think about, what are the benefits of that change? And so in the traditional fossil fuel economy, we obviously, when we think about beneficiaries, we obviously benefit from, being able to drive and electricity. But if you think about the revenue generated from these sources, from fossil fuel power plants and from refineries, most of the beneficiaries are either the fossil fuel companies or the utilities. As we start to move to distributed forms of renewables, we're starting to see all of these new models come about that think a little more critically about who is benefiting from the energy that we're producing. In one example out of California, there's this model known as community choice, which essentially allows cities and counties to band together and kind of form their own micro utility where they get to decide where their energy comes from, as well as how to distribute any excess revenue that was created through the generation of that electricity and paid for by the ratepayers. And so that sometimes they use that to develop different local projects and climate resiliency or job training or other cool things in the community. Sometimes they just give that money back to ratepayers as a dividend, and oftentimes end up reducing the amount of money that people spend on electricity by up to 30%, in some cases, a third, because of the way that they're approaching it, with much less bureaucracy, as kind of a larger utility. Especially in California, we have where I live, we have PG&E, which is a very large company that has like a lot of different layers of bureaucracy, and we end up and projects end up getting prioritized that raise the cost for us. And so they really focused on not only using the excess revenue, but also how can us as ordinary electricity consumers pay less for the services that we're getting. And also focusing on local jobs. If we're building more renewables, many of these community choice organizations think about how do we employ local people and stimulate the local economy through the projects we do. And in many different cases, they've really focused on hiring over 50% of workers on these different renewable projects who are from the communities that's receiving the energy, or from these community choice organizations. And while this started really with just one county in California, it grew to now there's 22 of these community choice organizations that are all focused on really what's needed from the local level and the local priorities of the energy needs in each place, and now provide over 50% of the energy in the state, and it really continues to grow. And you can actually, and I've done this, I actually did this, you can walk into an executive board meeting for a community choice provider. I did this when I lived in Oakland, and speak your mind. There's organizations that really focus on making sure that community choice in each area really focuses on community. And I saw one of those organizations quintuple the community project fund that was generated from excess revenue from ratepayers, surplus revenue or profit from ratepayers, from $1 million to $5 million a year. And so it definitely did have really an impact of that interface between us as the citizens and residents in an area and what our energy providers are doing. There's obviously a lot of different models from co-op solar and wind to many different ways from community solar of thinking about how do we shift the benefits of change to the community. And community thinking is at the heart really about adapting solutions to local needs and visions. So this is an example in West Virginia of an organization known as Coalfield Development, that trains laid off coal miners to transform surface mines into food forests, and by doing so, create new jobs in a place that for many years was really beholden to just one commodity, that being coal. And as coal is starting to decline, it's a really precarious way to structure your economy around one commodity. And so what they've done is tried to start the foundation of a new regenerative and renewable economy that's significantly more diverse. And so they started many different social enterprises. They started a construction company that builds affordable housing for people who need it in the area where there might be a housing shortage. They started it. They started their own solar company as well that installs solar, which I think they actually sold off to another local solar company. They acquired a company that makes t-shirt and apparel for Major League Baseball out of recycled material, and are creating new manufacturing jobs in the area. There's also a craft making company that actually, in combination with the construction company and collaborating with the Regenerative Farm organization, harvest some of the old materials at these old mine sites, these old surface mines, which essentially are either mountains that have been blasted apart or large open pit mines, and repurposes some of those materials in construction of the housing, as well as in some of the crafts that are made. And they also really focus on how do we also provide beyond just like employment, like opportunities for people to grow their careers, and find really new opportunities in this new economy that they're creating. And so they provide a free 2-year associate's degree. They provide counseling and a number of other different services that really help folks there to be part of this new renewable economy. And they founded by a local West Virginian in Appalachia, and really centered around these local values, which they call gumption, grit, and grace. And really, they see these values of resilience, of making things really well, of taking pride in craft and slowing down, as being really crucial to this new sustainable economy we want to create. So it's also really a window. Every community is potentially a window into all of this different knowledge and wisdom that's been accumulated over years for how do we create a sustainable society and a sustainable economy. This is another organization on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. It's known as Thunder Valley Community Development Corporation. And they started from a number of different indigenous activists and community builders on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And they combined both really a systems thinking approach to change, in addition to really rooting that in the benefits and visions of the community there. And so really they started by, for many years, holding town halls and meetings and asking people, like, what is your vision for a better future on the Pine Ridge Reservation? What does it look like? What do you want for your grandchildren? What do you want for your children? What do you really care about? And through all of these different meetings, they combined all of that wisdom into a single regenerative project that is focused on addressing multiple different issues that their community was facing through local visions and local values. And so they created this regenerative community that they saw some of the biggest challenges that they were facing was really high unemployment and youth unemployment, up to 70% in some cases. They saw that that there was a housing crisis with a housing shortage, with some people, in some communities, as many as 15 people living in a 2-bedroom trailer home. They saw a food crisis where over 99% of food was driven in from outside of the community. And so they looked at all these different issues that they were facing and thought about, like, what is a single solution that could address them? And so they trained youth in the area in construction to build new housing. Um, they built a regenerative organic farm in the middle of it, where they have an egg program where they provide eggs to people who need it and need access to healthy eggs that weren't available in the community, as well as sell to local supermarkets, and local, even like gas stations, and any place that kind of food is traditionally available in the area, as well as a regenerative organic farm that mixes a combination of a lot of native plants and choke cherries, and in a rotational way with the chickens, and kind of cycling the nutrients. And they hope to have as many as like 900 people living in this community. They built housing, they built different houses, and sometimes even the construction the folks who'd been trained in construction ended up becoming like first-time homeowners in some of these homes that they built. And even the way that they designed the kind of urban design of the area was focused on indigenous and the Lakota values of how they used to set up camp. And they designed like the houses kind of in a circle in the way that they used to set up tents in the past, and really focused on like, what does indigenous Native American design, urban design, look like? Oftentimes when we talk about building walkable or sustainable cities, we look back to the models of European cities before cars, and really kind of base a lot of our thinking around how do we kind of recreate Paris, or Copenhagen. But there's a tremendous amount of wisdom from millennia of place making and city making and town making and settlement making in the United States, from indigenous nations. And on Thunder Valley, they've shown kind of just one example of how that wisdom can create kind of this regenerative community. And they've also built a community center as well as apartments in the area. And the community center provides a number of different classes and skill development, as well as cultural revitalization, including Lakota cooking, and different ceremonies and art making, and also Lakota language class, to really revitalize all of these different aspects of their culture that had been discriminated against for the last 200 years. And yeah, in doing so, really created this inspiring community that's also 100% powered by solar, where all of the housing gets solar panels and has access to that at the same time. And in doing so, really multi-solved around these many different community needs by taking both a community and a systemic approach. And so thirdly, we have regenerative thinking. And as I'd mentioned before, regeneration is really about creating systems that grow and in communities, and that grow stronger over time. And we can think of regeneration in many different ways. We can think of it from a land sense, often with regenerative agriculture, where we focus on regenerating soil and regenerating nutrient cycles, and the surrounding ecologies. This is a organization in Minnesota, founded by Reginaldo Hazlet Marroquin, where he grew up in Guatemala, and he was really inspired by the way that that rainforests seem to almost effortlessly provide for so many species. and in a way that seems so elegant and doesn't really require any outside input. And so he took that inspiration, and through studying agriculture for many years, to develop this permaculture system that combines chickens as well as fruit and nut trees with other crops together into an integrated system that's all about, as he terms it, recharging the battery of the soil. And so that through the chicken manure and the leaf litter and everything, he says, like, we're putting back 70% of what's grown back into the soil. And by doing that, we recharge the soil battery so that every year the system starts off stronger. And so that we need less inputs in the next year, and then the next year, and we can produce more for even less cost and generate more income for farmers. And he's designed this system to kind of work in an 1.5 to 3 acre plots, and trains migrant farm workers to start their own farm ventures using this system. Has trained several hundred immigrant farm workers, in which, in the United States, over 70% of farm labor is from migrant farm workers. And so Reggie really wants to create this opportunity to use this wisdom of natural systems, of looking at not an acre as 40 some odd thousand square feet, but in 3 dimensions, really as like a cubic acre that goes all the way up, 10 feet tall with the trees, and then all the way down to the roots, and thinking about how do we harness this entire holistic system to recharge the soil, provide income and new opportunities for folks who maybe had been left out of kind of a ownership level in the farm industry. And how do we do that by benefiting our local ecologies at the same time? We can also think about regeneration in the sense of materials. This is an example of a startup out of British Columbia, Vancouver, known as Ronin 8. And what they do is they've essentially found a technology that was once used in mining, basically this massive tuning fork. And using sound energy, they're able to separate all of the different materials in our electronics. Often at the end of the lives of our electronics, they'll end up being shipped overseas into places in the developing world where folks are often sorting through these materials to get the gold and the silver in really toxic conditions, in a way that affects the communities negatively, as well as local ecologies. And so what Ronin 8 does is they take old electronics and they shred them in water to prevent any toxic dust from getting in the air. And then they essentially use this sound energy, this massive tuning fork, in order to separate the fiberglass from the metals, and then all the metals from each other, that separate the copper from the tin, the silver, the lead, the gold, the palladium, even like all these rare earth elements that end up either ending up in the trash or never being used again. And they've kind of extracted this almost like periodic tables worth of metals in our electronics to be used in the next cycle. And really, if we have this economy, which, debatably whether or not we want to have an economy that's focused on always really the next big thing, next new gadget coming out every year or 6 months, if we have that economy, we really need to be thinking about the material cycles within that, if we're really throwing away the last year's model of everything we make. And even applied to not regenerative, but renewable energy in solar panels and lithium ion batteries. Obviously, those are an improvement over fossil fuels, but at the end of their lives, they also end up in a dump. Or lithium ion batteries have a ton of different exotic toxic materials in them. And so they're really focused on how do we look at kind of like our batteries and our solar panels as kind of like a plant, where at the end of a plant's life, when it decomposes, it provides nutrients back to the soil. And it doesn't, if every plant that died after capturing the sun's energy, if every one of those plants polluted the earth, we wouldn't have we wouldn't have an earth. There would be no ecosystems and there would be no us. And so thinking about our energy in the same way. So at the end of a solar panel's life, after capturing a lot of energy from the sun, the end of a battery's life in providing battery storage and backup, which is crucial to balance the variability of renewables. At the end of its life, it should also be able to, all of its components, provide the feedstock or nutrients for the next cycle of things that we create. And really thinking about how do we almost cycle things as if our economy were an ecosystem itself. And then lastly, it's really important to think about regeneration of people and regeneration of our confidence, as well as our vision for what future we want to create is so important. This is a farm in Albany, New York, known as Soulfire Farm, founded by Leah Penniman and her partner, which empowers and trains Black and Indigenous farmers to regenerate the land and learn permaculture skills, as well as kind of community building skills and organizing skills and construction skills, and then take that knowledge to start community farms across the country in their own communities, and introduce more people to healthy food and connection to the land, and really kind of starting almost like a training the trainer approach, where they've really started this movement of empowering and creating many different community farms across the country that have that connection to the community, of providing healthy food, as well as new skills and connection to our food systems and sustainability and nature, as well as fun and regenerating our confidence in what's possible. And so, yeah, ultimately, this project of regeneration is in ourselves as well. How do we regenerate our spirit of what we think is possible, and how we approach problem solving and the future that we dream up and then hopefully ultimately create. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm just going to now turn it over to some of the partner organizations and give three representatives from these organizations a chance to speak on how do you use some of this sustainable design thinking in your work, or in general, how you approach sustainability thinking and how you approach sustainable design and in your work and all the programs that you create and everything you do. So we're going to start with Jackie Goodwin first at Urban Green Lab. And Urban Green Lab is focused on transforming schools, businesses, and nonprofits into really like labs and hubs for sustainable practice and learning. So I'll turn it over to you, Jackie, to speak to some of these principles discussed in the presentation, or any other thoughts you might want to share about how you approach sustainable design in your work.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Trevor. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. So I work at Urban Green Lab. I'm the Sustainable Workplaces Manager there. So I manage our entire workplaces division. And really our mission is to teach communities how to live sustainably. Very simple. We essentially work in schools, workplaces, and households. And we work to organize teams of people in these places, train them on sustainability, train them how to teach others about sustainability, and then make larger connections within the community to help them reach their sustainability goals. So we really envision a world where sustainability and learning about sustainability is part of everyday life, which is why we kind of meet people where they are in these different institutions, whether they're at work or they're at home, and then they sort of take that knowledge, wherever they may go. So I've been thinking a bit about the different types of thinking that Trevor mentioned here, and I think regenerative thinking is something that we use quite a bit, regeneration, in our work, because we really work to embed these systems of learning about sustainability in these different kind of pockets of the city where we work. And then we hope that they thrive long beyond our time there, right? So one of our programs is called Sustainable Classrooms. And in that, my colleague trains K through 12 Metro Nashville public school teachers how to teach students about sustainability. No standard for learning about sustainability. There's no measurable metric for that in Tennessee. So she trains teachers how to teach about sustainability. And then each of those teachers reaches about 100 students per year. And then, they go on year after year to continue teaching about sustainability. And then those students grow up, they enter the workforce, they might work in Nashville or attend a higher education institution in Nashville. And so those are systems that we really hope can thrive forever here in the city. So that's kind of the regeneration side of things. And then I want to mention as well the systems thinking that we talked about, because I know that's a common one that we think about a lot when we talk about programs at Urban Green Lab and how we can best serve the community here. So because we really integrate into systems that already exist, we sort of leverage the knowledge that those people have. And when I work with the workplace, I will defer to the workplace a lot and say, the culture best, what your certain co-benefits are of doing certain behaviors in your workplace. And we teach about co-benefits as well when we talk about sustainability. So if I give a training and I'm talking about tree planting, why that's important for soil health and water and carbon sequestration, it's also just great for people. It's great to have shade. It's great to have trees that have fruit on them. And so we really help people think about the triple bottom line of things to some respect, right? And how those systems are all connected. And lastly, for community, I want to touch briefly on a bit of our history as an organization. We are just over a decade old, so we're pretty young, but we're a nonprofit here in Nashville, and we are a highly adaptive organization. So we've really responded to the needs of our community, and that's kind of given way to our trajectory and how we operate here. So we started as a group of friends who wanted to have kind of a hub of learning about sustainability in Nashville, a physical building. And then we moved to a mobile lab. So a lab that would drive around the city and go to different places, events and schools, and talk about sustainability education. And now we are kind of decentralized, and we're also in a virtual world. So it makes it easier to reach different schools, businesses, nonprofits, and households, and really integrate sustainability education without relying on a mobile lab or a physical brick and mortar space. So we've been very responsive to what the community wants. We often talk with our community partners and our friends in the industry before we make changes to any of our programming to really respond to what is happening. Whether we have institutional changes or government changes or anything like that. So that's really what Urban Green Lab does. We work to distill kind of complex sustainability education and make it more accessible for people in the city to live sustainably.
Thank you, Jackie. Yeah, I really like the kind of approach of going around the different city and like kind of the mobile aspect of it and the co-benefit aspect of some of the projects you have and you focus on. So yeah, really cool to see how you've approached things from kind of a community and systems thinking approach. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Mm-hmm. Jeff Barry from Tennessee Environmental Council, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, thank you so much, Trevor, for this opportunity to learn what you've had to share and what you've learned through an extensive process, obviously, of research. Very inspiring examples. And I'm a long time believer in that, envisioning the world you want and finding examples and evidence of that world around, because it's already there in many ways, and showcasing those examples. And when we see what we want to work towards, and we see that things do work and they're actually really cool, I do believe more people will adopt those ideas. And so I've been told I'm long-winded, but I'll try to keep it brief. I really love the title of your book, The Bright Green Future. You know, when I first started with Tennessee Environmental Council in 2014, I was pitching an idea of producing a video series called Bright Green Tennessee. So we think alike, I would say that. And I do believe that phrase, bright green, says so much. It's a beautiful color. It's the color of spring. And it's a color of hope. And just the color itself raises the spirits. And I think that is what sustainability is. And so individually, I've long been not quite satisfied with the traditional definitions of sustainability. And one of our core programs at Tennessee Environmental Council is called Sustainable Tennessee. So we are believers in the idea, the concept, and how do we become a more sustainable society? That is what we are all working towards. But the traditional definitions of sustainability didn't really work for me. So when I became more adopted or came into more of a leadership role at Tennessee Environmental Council, I began asserting my influence to sort of shift how we work as an organization. And we were founded in 1970, so we've been doing this work for over 50 years now. And so what are we going to do for the next 50 years that's going to make the greatest impact? That was one of the key questions we asked ourselves when we started a strategic planning process in 2019. How can we make the greatest impact as a small organization with the resources we have? And the greatest impact in what? Well, that is towards sustainability. But that phrase, that word itself, I don't think is going to get a lot of people rallying around the cause in Tennessee. And I mentioned in my comment that sort of the cultural divide. And we're a Tennessee, so we've got to represent people and reflect the culture of our state, which is really diverse, from the urban environment to the rural, and Appalachia to the Mississippi. It's like quite a diverse, the races and demographics, the income levels. So we wanted to make our work as appealing to as many of those people as possible, because really, if we're going to shift the world and work towards a sustainable world, it's got to involve everybody. Everybody has to be on board in some way. And of course, we're not going to get everybody, but what we decided was that we would modify our mission slightly and update it. And our mission, looking at on the screen, is our current mission. And it's pretty simple. We're helping people to improve our environment. And of course, sustainability and improvement, there's a lot of subjectivity there. We gave a lot to what are we working towards? What is the vision for a better future? What does the future look like? So we came up with a vision statement that would do the best that we could think of to outpicture what the world looks like when we succeed at sustainability. And in that world, it's sort of like a three-pronged approach, or three key aspirations that we strive for with Tennessee Environmental Council. And I'll share those, and it's really simple. And it's the three things that we came up with that define sustainability. It's continual improvement, but what is that improvement working towards? It's working towards, 1, thriving habitats. 2 is a circular economy. And the third thing is climate balance. And as you know, those things are all interrelated. But they are very distinctive too. Habitats are for the animals, the plants, and the people. And thriving habitats, so it embodies a lot. And you can picture what those habitats might look like or feel like for people and animals, and the plants and insects. So thriving habitats, a circular economy, and as we all know, that is the way of the future, right? It's taking all those. That was a beautiful example you had of the technology that separates out elements of the batteries, the technologies. E-waste recycling is so critical. So that's circular economy. That's a great example of it. And so the third thing, climate balance, is what does a renewable energy economy lead to? is part of leading us to what we're trying to get, which is climate balance, where we're no longer pumping more pollution into the environment than the environment can handle. So reaching a point of balance with what we put into the atmosphere and what's going out in terms of energy. And so all the solutions that we implement in our programs address one of those three key things, and oftentimes one solution will address several, like planting the tree pretty much hits all those in some way. So we created programs that will be appealing to people in Tennessee that are advance us towards those the better future, the vision that we're working towards, sustainable. And so we have programs around composting, recycling, the statewide tree program. In our Tennessee Tree Days coming up, we have 75,000 trees on order from the nurseries, and we're hoping everyone will do their part and plant at least one of those. Tennessee Tree Day, the compost program, and a pollinator program we call Generate Some Buzz. But we want to make sure when we create a program, it is working towards one of these vision pillars for the future and what we are trying to create. And I mean, that's essentially, I hope that answers your question or what you're trying to get at, but that's the way we approach the work and the way we look at sustainability, and making sure that when we speak to the people of Tennessee, when we work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeffrey. I appreciate that. It's cool to hear about you thinking critically about how we frame sustainability, like what does it mean, and also like that word, like it's not always a word that resonates with everyone, and so thinking about communication and the words we choose are extremely important, and how we frame the conversation and provide inclusive spaces for the variety of the diversity of the United States, as well as even just Tennessee as a microcosm of that. So really cool to hear that you're focused on that, as well as kind of this multiple kind of principled approach to sustainability. So thank you so much for sharing that and the work you do there. Daniel, did you want to share from Climate Nashville?
Yeah, it's good to follow Jeff. I used to work for Jeff. Great film. I was his film screener. Great film, Kilowatt Hours. That's OURS. If you can get a copy of that film, it's still one of the best energy films I've ever seen. So yes, Climate Nashville. I'll just use a couple of examples. I got to kind of focus here on TVA. TVA is our energy provider, and it's actually the largest utility in the country. It provides energy for about 1 out of 30 households in the United States. TVA was formed in the Great Depression, and interestingly enough, they understood these principles. They were doing all sorts of community development projects throughout the valley, and it was a pretty amazing time. But by the 1950s, they got completely away from that and got into the business of providing cheap power. Okay. And yes, they do still provide very inexpensive power. But the contradiction is, in Tennessee, we have some of the highest household energy costs in the country, and low-income people have the highest energy burdens in the country. Memphis is actually the worst. And so there's a real contradiction there. And so one thing we did, we had a low-income energy task force out of Trinity Lane United Methodist Church. They have a community meal there every week, and it's the Nashville Food Project, who does sustainable food projects, and most of these folks are low-income people in that community. So we brought them together for a series of workshops, and we just talked about what are our energy needs, particularly for low-income people. And then we started looking, well, what are people doing around the country, and how can we bring these things together? And we came up with 10 principles. Everything from, if you're going to do weatherization, you might need to do some home repairs first, because a lot of these homes are falling apart. How do you link jobs to that? How do you link conservation education to this? How do you, whole home weatherization, all sorts of things like that. We came up with these 10 principles. And then we met with a vice president of TVA, and he really resonated with it. And he said, well, you've got to present this to the board of TVA. And eventually, home energy program. And we now have that in Nashville. And again, they're doing whole home weatherization programs, and that greatly improves the health. One of the best things you can do for low-income people's health is now we have the Roundup program. I guess it was just on the news the other day. It's coming up where you round up your utility bills to the nearest dollar, and all that money goes into this program. It's not enough, but it is an example of working with the community. I mean, it's great, but we need to get it up to scale. But it's a great example of working with, listening to low-income people, thinking systematically out of the community, and also systematically of all these linkages. The second piece is work. Energy is essentially work. And TVA, with these early community development projects, was looking about bringing good work and developing good work in the Valley. And we're kind of trying to re-explore that. We had the new green last January. We had 8 topics: energy, democracy, and economy, energy, jobs in a green economy, federal stimulus and green jobs, religion, labor, and ecology, worker cooperatives and green jobs, regenerative agriculture, labor and green jobs, and equitable transportation and green jobs. So we're looking at the linkage of good work, the type of things that Trevor's talking about, and energy savings, and renewable energy. And one of my goals is to get TVA back to this kind of thinking this way economically. Not just chasing factories from pulling factories in from somewhere else in the country into Tennessee, but instead, how can we really develop the types of good jobs that also work systematically and holistically in an economy for Tennessee. So that's a bit of our vision, and so we're essentially a consortium of groups in Nashville that work on that. Again, we work with coalition around the state too, and so yeah, that's our vision at Climate Nashville, and how we think about some of these things. So.
Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, that's great to hear, and really, really interesting to hear about the history of TVA. I didn't know about that, but yeah, it's cool to see how I know there's definitely this history of rural electric co-ops and the original kind of energy providers that were thinking critically about how do we really service the community through the work we do, through providing energy and thinking about their needs, beyond just like, how do we maximize whatever profit from the energy system. So really cool to hear your work and in your work in low income communities, and also kind of developing these like 10 different principles. And it's inspiring to see how you took that to TVA to like help them get back to some of their community, maybe more community or systems oriented approach that they originally founded around. Yeah, thank you. I learned a lot just from you three folks sharing just, snapshots of the work you do. It's really inspiring to see, all of the different ways that across the country and in, this looking at a snapshot of Tennessee and Nashville area and, other parts of Tennessee, how you have approached sustainability from a really intense community focus and adapted programs to community needs, and thought critically about like what are these systemic issues and what are the principles that might start addressing them in the work you do. So really inspired and really grateful for your partnership on this event. Really cool, and I'm excited to see how your work continues to evolve. So thank you all. So we're towards the end of the meeting, and we'll just leave it for any questions, thoughts, and comments from folks. I saw a few people put in kind of some questions throughout the talk, but if you have any questions, if you want to speak directly, feel free to raise your hand through the reaction button. It might be hidden under more. Yeah, feel free to raise your hand, or just feel free to jump in if you wanted to say anything, or put your questions into the chat, or any comments or thoughts or ideas you had. Go back to see through some of. Ursula King asked a question. Does Agritopia have socioeconomic diversity among their inhabitants? That's a great question. I know that was like one of their focuses, is to like allow that through the different types of building, of different types of building design, and through multifamily homes and different types of single family homes. I think we do ultimately run into this challenge of there's a premium on walkable, sustainable communities, and we're seeing that with gentrification all throughout the United States, in where people are recognizing the like value of these places, and so it ultimately does create socioeconomic issues around access to these places, and so that is something that we really need to think critically about, like how do we create communities that are also focused on that diversity too. And yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't always end up working out. There are a lot of examples where it's led by original residents of a low-income community that started kind of grassroots development and community-focused development. And there's definitely a whole movement around this kind of grassroots community development, and even grassroots real estate and cooperative real estate that does really seek to provide socioeconomic diversity and access to places that are walkable and are great neighborhoods. Thanks for bringing that up. I'm seeing some new messages.
We have a hand up here too as well, Trevor.
I'm sorry, I missed it. Okay, Ida, go for it.
Hi, did I find the mute button?
You got it.
Okay, hi. Yeah, I want to start off at what you shared at the beginning of the talk here of the hope, and but I also see a parallel to hopelessness, and I, in honor, am thrilled to be a part of this discussion, to be a part of it in person, and to know that it's out there happening. And I feel that the discussions are happening all over Middle Tennessee, the nation, the world. And I don't know if your project started before the IPCC's report. How long have you been working on this project?
Yeah, I've been working on it for about 5 years.
Because as some of us know, and I hope I'm getting that right, the IPCC's report on climate change is pretty startling. And so with all these great conversations and chats, I feel that we are ready to, I hope we're ready to go to that next level of really pressing this to happen. And in Middle Tennessee in particular, TVA has a great hold on helping us move forward. And I think that there needs to be a shift. When you spoke, you opened with the thought of a shift. And I think that shift is possible. I'm hopeful that it's possible. because as a human mass, we have to have a major shift. A way that we've been living is not sustainable. And I know from a friend who worked in the dean's office at the University of Wisconsin, she found that every campus in the United States, in their business departments, they lack ethics as a prerequisite course. And there is a lot of money to be made with keeping it quite the way it has been. And we have to move forward. And I think we have to start pushing to bring us forward.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Ita. Yeah, it is important to be having these conversations about like, what is our vision for the future? What does it look like? What are examples of people who've already made it happen? And like, what can we learn from them? And what are like the unique strengths and challenges that we face in, you know, our unique communities? Every community is different, and every vision for the future is different. It can't be like some one size fits all thing. Though, you know, we need change at multiple different levels, from the federal level to the state level, to, you know, at the local level, through different bills and laws and incentives to really to shift this large giant of our economy towards a sustainable future. And I think it's really important to start, you know, articulating at the ground level what sustainability means, so that we can apply that. We're getting towards the end, and so I'll just wrap it up with, if you would like to go deeper on any of the topics discussed, as well as like some of the examples in the presentation and some of the ideas, the book I wrote, Bright Green Future, it goes across like energy, industry, cities, and farms to look like across these various different sectors. How do we create a sustainable society? And has many more. It's kind of written through the story, through kind of storytelling, through these examples, from people who've actually kind of practically made it work in their communities, to create a vision for a sustainable future. You can get 15% off a signed copy of the book with promo code Envision. And I'd also love to get in touch and connect if you just want to share feedback, any thoughts you have, collaboration ideas. I'm really open to anything, even if you just want to, you know, talk for a little bit. I'm super down. So you can reach me at trevor@brightgreenfuture.com. And then lastly, I wanted to share some of the kind of upcoming events from some of the orgs that participated today. Find ways to kind of get involved and plugged in. I mean, it seems like a lot of folks are already very engaged in this meeting and the various different sustainability work, but there's many different ways you can get engaged. And so Climate Nashville has a monthly meeting that's coming up this February 7th at 6:30 p.m. It's a virtual meeting, and you can get the Zoom information by emailing tap10@gmail.com. And Tennessee Environmental Council has a Reserve a Tree for Tennessee Tree Day. You can basically reserve a tree for this big statewide tree planting event by February. Basically reserve your tree by February 13th. And then Urban Green Lab has a teacher training for sustainable classrooms, where educators can get a kind of crash course in sustainability and how to kind of apply that in education in their work, and educating the next generation in sustainability. And so that's on February 18th at 9 a.m. That's virtual, but I believe these classes come up quite often. And yeah, just wanted to end by, if anyone from any of these organizations wants to talk a little bit more about these events, or kind of anything on the horizon, I'll let you jump in.
I can say a word on our teacher training. Is really for, it doesn't have to be for formal educators, informal educators, daycare teachers, really anyone is welcome to come learn about how to teach about sustainability. And you can use our website to check out other stuff as well. We have some virtual programming through our Sustainable in the City YouTube live sessions. And if you want to get involved in any of our programming and get involved in the community here in Nashville around sustainability.
Yeah, we'd love to have folks too at our meeting, or if you can't make that meeting, just email me at that address. We'll get you on our email list and all the various activities that we got going on. And thanks, Trevor, for a great presentation.
Awesome. Thank you both. I don't know, Jeffrey, if you wanted to share any final words on how people can get plugged into your work.
We have all kinds of opportunities year-round, not just Tennessee Tree Day, but visit our website, tectn.org, or just Google Tennessee Brown Oak Council. And I did want to say it's really wonderful to see so many friendly faces, so many friends here and colleagues. We have a wonderful community here in Tennessee, and it's just an honor to work with all of you, even though we may not see each other in person as much these days. It's still nice to know that we're all working towards the same similar or very similar future, a better one. So I just want to appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey. Thanks for your partnership, as well as both of these other really inspiring orgs. And yeah, thank you also for all of your great contributions. I learned a lot. I learned a lot in every one of these presentations, and I feel like especially in this one, there's a lot of really thoughtful people here that are really thinking critically and deeply about sustainability. And it's 8:30 on a Wednesday and you all are here. That's a miracle in itself. Like, that gives me hope that we might just be able to solve this thing, as challenging as it is. So I'm really, really honored to get to interface with you all, and this is wonderful. Yeah, I would also love, feel free to reach out. I'm Trevor at breakgreenfuture.com. I'll also share a follow-up email with the events from these different organizations partnered, as well as a recording of this event, and kind of other information that might be relevant to your work. So thank you all so much, and I will close it out. Have a wonderful day and weekend. I mean week, not weekend. Bye.